Welcome to Part of the System, and today I'm with Matt Griffiths. How are you going, Matt?
Really well, thanks, David. Thanks for inviting me along.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on and having a chat with me today. So a little bit about Matt. Matt is the lead and systems data analyst for leisure management company BlueFit and board director and current chair of the Aquatic and Recreation Institute, which is the peak body for operators of aquatic and recreation facilities in New South Wales. So you've been very busy at the moment, Matt.
Certainly have.
Now, Matt has worked in the aquatics and recreation industry for about 19 years, initially starting as a swim teacher after completing a degree in sport and exercise management, and then continuing into management and senior leadership roles. Now, Matt's experience spans local government, commercial operators, and non-for-profits with a focus on aquatic operations and risk management. Now, notably, Matt worked for Royal Life for about 10 years, I think, in both national and state level roles, overseeing the development of risk and safety in services to the aquatic sector. Now, I know, Matt, you've got a huge passion for data, which I think you kind of uncovered when you were at Royal Life, data and research. But over the course of Matt's career, I think you've represented the sector on working groups and technical advisory committees for the development of Australian standards, industry skills and training packages, reviewing government regulations, industry guidelines and codes of practice. So I think it's fantastic timing that I'm speaking to you today with our roadmap as we come out of COVID. So yeah, welcome.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here, and it's good to have the opportunity to talk about the system and what's happening in aquatics and recreation, and hopefully what's going to happen over the next couple of years as we look to a world where we're living with COVID and how everything is going to shift for us.
Yeah, can't wait to get into it. So, all right, well, we'll crack on. And yeah, what does well-being mean to you?
Look, this is a great question, and I think you probably get a lot of different answers to this question when you ask it. Certainly for me, well-being and the definition of well-being has really changed throughout the course of my life and where I've been at different stages of my life. Where I am right now, well-being is really about a state of satisfaction, right? It's acceptance with where I am in my life, and how I'm feeling right now and in the present moment. When I was younger, it's probably more about my physical well-being, my health, and how I felt, my athletic performance, and all of those things. But as I've gotten older, as I've taken on more demanding jobs, as I've become a father, it's really shifted, and now the emphasis is really more so on my mental health and how I'm dealing in particular with anxiety and stress, which is something that I and many Australians have battled with over the years. But certainly. Well-being to me is, how I now frame my mental health and the things that I'm doing to ensure that I'm feeling positive about myself and my situation, and that I'm having positive interactions with the people most important to me.
Yeah, great. And you talk about that anxiety and stress, previously, like, is there sometimes when you feel like, you might be a little bit out of sync and you might need to, do other things to make yourself feel better and get that balance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, work-life balance has always been something that's always been a challenge for me for my entire life. And probably, reflecting back, now having a greater awareness of how anxiety and stress impacts me. Looking back at periods of my life, I can recognize that I was actually stressed and anxious. I wasn't necessarily taking care of my mental health as well as I could have been. So really my weeks and my days, I embed a lot of mental hygiene practices into those days now, to make sure that I'm better managing my feelings of stress and anxiety, ensuring that they don't overwhelm me. Like anything, there are times when that slips, things change. I might be physically feeling better some days other than others, but mentally not as well. But just on a whole, right, well-being is about there being on the balance of it all. It's more positive than negative, right? And then there's an acceptance, an understanding of where I'm at, and accepting that I might not be at my best today, but I certainly understand where I am. I'm aware of how I feel, I'm aware of my mental and physical health, and I know that I'm doing the right things to ensure that I get back to a more positive place more quickly.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've really started to get a little bit more self-aware of how you feel, and you know what you need to do to keep your well-being in check. And yeah, I think from your experience, you know, dealing with life-threatening environments and a lot around risk and water safety, you know, I'm sure at times it's been stressful for you, but it's great that you're looking after yourself through self-care. And yeah, tell us a little bit more, Matt, about that journey that you've been on.
Yeah, so I mean, as you talked about at the start, I've been in aquatics and recreation now for about 19 years. I fell into the sector.
How did you fall into it?
Well, I literally fell in. No, look, so I was studying at university doing a sports management degree. My sister was a passionate water polo player and worked in the sector. And she encouraged me to take up swim teaching. We spent a lot of time in the water and around the water, but I wasn't a swimmer at all. But I started swim teaching, really enjoyed interacting with kids and teaching them skills. I was a decent rugby player at school and really enjoyed coaching and loved sharing skills. So really enjoyed swim teaching, and then just naturally evolved in that role. So I finished the sports and exercise management degree. I had lofty ambitions of working for the Australian Rugby Union or a national sporting organisation. The reality was it was super competitive and really poorly paid for a uni graduate.
It makes sense now because you've got quite a presence on Twitter when it comes to rugby union.
Yeah. Follow me at Matt A. Griffiths, and hear me rant on Twitter instead of shout at the TV is really the approach there. But yeah, so I kind of continued my journey within aquatics and recreation. I took on a swim school coordinator role. Obviously proved myself competent. I was running my first centre at 22. By 24, I was overseeing 13.
Which one was that?
So that was the Mossman Swim Centre here in Sydney.
Yeah, sure.
I worked for a company, Aquatic Leisure Management, which are probably better known now as Easy Swim. And I was overseeing by 24, 13 of their sites.
Wow.
And then, really, that was pretty high stress for a 24-year-old. Probably learned that in hindsight, I was competent technically, but didn't really have, the emotional intelligence and soft skills to handle such a demanding role. So
that would have been a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I think we learn this throughout our career. Aquatics and recreation, high risk environments, very people orientated environments as well, in terms of a swim school coordinator can lead a team of anywhere between 15 to 60 young people, and all the challenges that it brings. Being a natural introvert, not necessarily a people person myself, I become quite fatigued and frustrated dealing with people. It takes a lot to get me up to be in a room full of people. That really took its toll on me. So I took a break. I traveled the world, really enjoyed, spending 4 months in Asia, just kicking around, and 6 months in Europe. I guess just focusing on myself for a while, being a little bit selfish and taking the opportunity that I didn't take straight out of school. And then came back and got a job at Royal Life Saving. And most people will probably know me for my work at Royal Life Saving, right? Where I worked for a couple of years with the Royal Life Saving National Office, and then 5 or so years with Royal Life Saving New South Wales. And those roles were really focused on developing aquatic risk practice. So, I was a technical writer for GSPO and coordinated the GSPO working groups at that time.
And the GSPO is the guidelines for pool safe operations.
Sorry, yes, guidelines for safe pool operations, which is a guiding document for any operator of aquatic facilities on how to apply essentially industry standard risk practices to their venue operations. I worked on their safety assessment programs, and it was a great time in my life, auditing across the whole country. auditing risk practices in aquatic facilities. I saw everything from remote regional pools in indigenous communities in the Northern Territory right through to, at that stage, $60 million aquatic and recreation venues in the heart of Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah.
So I got a really good broad understanding of the nuance and all the challenges that aquatic and recreation facilities face, and was really, it was a great opportunity to see the country, but also meet a lot of great people and see how they approach what effectively are the same challenges, but in different ways and in different contexts. So that was really cool. And then from there, I moved into Royal Life Saving New South Wales. So essentially doing the same things, but really at a state level. So focusing really on what was happening in New South Wales, and building partnership was a big part of that role. So focusing on getting broad adoption of improved risk practices, things like the Keep Watch at Public Pools program and the Swim Survive program, which were two programs which really were about, one was about parental supervision and one was about water safety education, making sure that there was broad adoption of that in New South Wales. But Royal Life Saving has probably dominated my career. It's probably been half my career. So a couple of years ago, I looked for a changing situation, changing environment, new challenge, and that's what led me to BlueFit, who at the time were a small company but rapidly growing and going through some really exciting changes, and a really good opportunity for me to jump back into aquatic operations and re-establish myself as a venue manager initially.
Yeah, wow, Mass, that's it's a lot of experience there. And from my connection with you, it was always through Royal Life, and someone that has got all this expertise in risk and Australian standards and things. And I just want to dig into that a little bit. In terms of safety, across for the industry, what are the big improvements that you've seen over the last few years, and still some of the challenges?
Yeah, I think there's been in some areas of the country, there's been a big increase in their kind of risk maturity and risk understanding.
Yeah.
More so than anything, they're more educated about risk, the application of risk management principles and practices, and the awareness of the need to comply with a host of legislation and standards. But there's still this huge disparity. Like the scale of risk understanding goes from virtually nothing to very detailed expertise in venues. Some organisations employ whole risk teams and have really good detailed understandings of risk, and specifically the aquatics context, which is it's less defined than risk in some other contexts. But then you go out to some areas and we're still seeing some practices that just wouldn't comply with any modern regulation, right? And there's just very little understanding of what's required to comply. And I think the issue with the sector, or the biggest challenge for the sector, is that parts of the sector are being left behind when it comes to risk. And so we need to actually keep bringing them forward with us and helping them to catch up to the standards of everyone else, because there's an increased regulatory focus on aquatic venues in particular.
Yeah, and I think the in-service training is a big part of that as well, and the capability, and obviously we're a casualised workforce, so I think the more permanency helps with that type of stuff as well.
Yeah, and there's certainly I reflect on my experience. When I came through university, I was the second class at the University of Technology Sydney that had done a dedicated degree in sports recreation management. So we were the second class. There was a leisure management and a tourism management stream as well, and it was the first time in Australia, the first university to offer a specialised degree. 20 years on, a lot of our facility managers are now coming through with that higher education focus and a broader understanding of management in particular. which I think is a big change in the sector. When I first entered the sector, there was no qualification or education requirement beyond simply a full lifeguard license to manage a venue. But that expectation has definitely shifted in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, well, it's maturity, like you said, Matt, isn't it? And as we progress, we hopefully get better. And yeah, the Keep Watch campaign is a really great one as well. So obviously you're at BlueFit, and you're head of data and research, but also you're board director and chair of the Aquatic Recreation Institute. And yeah, so it's huge, Matt, and obviously there's so much going on. It's talk about timing, stepping into that role. But yeah, firstly, tell us where the ARI fits into the system.
Yeah, so the Aquatic and Recreation Institute is the peak body for operators of aquatic and recreation facilities in New South Wales. So its principal role is to provide education and networking opportunities for its members. And it also advocates for the sector on issues of importance. So really, when we talk about education networking opportunities, what we're talking about is the sharing of ideas and sort of facilitating the opportunity to share those ideas. So it's really about helping the sector advance, become a stronger sector, stronger workforce by sharing best practice, really, is the idea, and also creating opportunities to cross-pollinate ideas across sectors as well as an increasing focus of the ARI. I guess also we're recognising that as a peak body, our role is definitely in advocacy. And is also telling the story of the sector and educating, at the moment, government in particular about what the sector does and the contribution that the sector makes on a host of issues. Principally at the moment, it's around economic contribution and social impact. But there's also a story that we're trying to tell there in terms of workforce and the contribution of the sector to employment in particular, and how vitally important that is at the moment.
Yeah, great. And it's a newish board, isn't it, really, in terms of people coming together? And I get the advocacy and trying to lead the sector, I suppose, or provide the advocacy for the sector with the COVID recovery and the roadmap. Have you had any reflections, or how's it all been going?
Yeah, look, this current board has been together for 4 months.
Wow.
I've been
So
chair for
let me get
3.
that right. So just about came together, and then we went in a lockdown for 3 months.
It came together the Wednesday before lockdown commenced. Was when the board the first board meeting occurred the Wednesday before lockdown commenced. So we had one meeting, then we were thrust into lockdown. Our first lockdown board meeting, we had a change of chair, and I was fortunate enough to step into that role. So really, like, in effect, we've had 2.5 months really to get going and geared up, and we've done a phenomenal amount of work in that 2 months. We've released a new strategy for the organisation. We've overhauled our membership program. We've obviously been working tirelessly on the sector's reopening and advocating for the sector to reopen at an early stage in New South Wales roadmap to recovery. And we've recommenced all of our events programs, and really have a couple of other things in the works that we'll announce over the next couple of weeks as well. But yeah, for a board that I guess there's 2 really important things that I'd like people to understand about the Aquatic and Recreation Institute is that the board are all volunteers, and the board all have very, very demanding jobs. And so on top of their demanding roles, really working very, very hard in the background for the sector to make sure that as a sector, we have a strong voice with government, and we also have lots of opportunities to grow and develop and evolve as a sector as well. So it's been a whirlwind 2 months. I don't think I could have stepped into the role of chair at a more uncertain time in the sector's history, but also probably a phenomenal opportunity to have an impact and get some really great outcomes for the sector, which I think we've achieved.
I absolutely agree. I think you guys have done a terrific job, and you've been really there's been some great leadership in terms of speaking to government and advocating and just that consistency in language, I think, providing to the sector in trying to grapple with what's going on with all these public orders and synthesizing it into something that everybody can understand. And obviously it was all brought forward as well, wasn't it? which was a good thing for opening, and also a challenging thing.
Yeah, we were reflecting on this. I think in the space of 3 weeks, we went from opening first at or opening early before New South Wales reached the 70% milestone, to not opening to the 1 December, to opening at 80%, and then back to opening at 70%. So the sector's reopening moved 4 times, and the conditions under which it opened changed a lot, and there was a lot of effort there. But I think the key thing that we learned through that process is how important it is to educate government, and how, as a sector, we probably hadn't done enough in the years where we weren't facing crisis. In the good times when it was business as usual, to help people understand the contribution of our sector. And so we're as a sector, we're quite fragmented. Information specific to the New South Wales context was somewhat lacking, and government didn't truly understand the full scope of what we did. They had a really clear understanding of the Learn to Swim agenda and the water safety agenda, because organisations like Royal ISO have been really effective in their message, but the wider sector around our contribution and our social impact, the health benefits of our venues, the social connection that was created of our venues is not really clearly articulated to government and well understood. And when you talk about a community that's been in lockdown that is now going to have to reconnect over the next 6 months, aquatic and recreation venues are going to be one of those key locations where that social reconnection happens, and is vitally important to the well-being of communities as a whole. Not just physically and not just in regards to water safety, but also mentally and emotionally over the next couple of months.
I love it how you bring it back to well-being. That's awesome. And it appears like we've had one voice, educating and going to government and speaking on behalf of the sector. And I think that's really helped in terms of bringing everything forward. And I think in adversity, sometimes, Matt, we all pull together, and it sounds like the board have done that, thrown together everybody, but you've all had a common kind of thing to work towards. So it's exciting times. And I mean, the other part, or what comes up for me is that it is these aquatic centres. It's not just about swimming lessons, is it? It's the employment and training you talk about. It's the social value. They're really important for communities. And with that, in terms of the aquatics and leisure industry and the recovery, the bounce back from COVID, have you got any forecasts? Because I know you're a bit of a data nerd, in terms of what the attendance forecasts are going to be like moving forward for the sector.
I think we have a little bit of insight. Obviously, Active Exchange, who are a company that does sector intelligence for aquatics and recreation, published some information coming out of the last lockdowns, which indicated that it took roughly 6 to 9 months for business to return to aquatic and recreation venues. So that was both visitation, memberships, and program enrollments, Learn to Swim enrollments. Very different context though, coming out of the last lockdown. There was kind of these ongoing staged restrictions as the sector came out. So we went from occupancy limits on venue, capacity limits on venues, to square meter rules, to more relaxed square meter rules, and then what is now the new business as usual, which is mask wearing and what have you. This time, however, the New South Wales government has taken a very, very different approach, in that they have essentially thrown the doors open for 80% of what aquatic and recreation venues do, right from day dot. Just talking from the experience that I have and the data that I'm able to look at, we're seeing really, really high demand for things like Learn to Swim programs, and really, really high demand for children's programs in particular. We're seeing some really strong return of exercise programs. Where we're a little bit cautious is the recreational element of aquatics, in particular, when and how that will return, and also membership. There seems to be a slower uptake of or slower return of membership whilst there's still restrictions in place on things like group fitness, that we hope when those limits are removed will accelerate again. I think the key difference this time for the sector, though, is that the primary business and revenue drivers for the sector have been returned really, really early on. So the sector is not going to be as slow to recover and is going to be able to make investment in growth activities sooner. The biggest challenge that we're going to face, though, is that we missed a whole recruitment cycle. And what's probably going to limit our return or limit our growth and the recovery activity is actually going to be workforce and availability of workforce. Because whilst individual organisations may have the similar attrition rates or non-return rates of employees coming out of this COVID recovery, usually what happens is there's a mobility of workforce within the sector. And our concern at the moment is that there's not going to be that mobility within the sector. The attrition rate is actually going to be higher for people leaving the sector seeking more secure employment, and that's really going to constrain our ability to recover. Learn to swim in particular, where demand is far exceeding the capacity of the sector to deliver. And also there's concern there noting that the biggest stimulus package for aquatics and recreation in New South Wales is about to hit January at this stage, which is a $44 million investment in preschool Learn to Swim, which is, New South Wales government is hoping going to fuel a lot of demand for services, but the question now is, does the sector have the capability to deliver?
And I think it's been well documented, hasn't it, in terms of a crisis, even, in terms of swim teachers and lifeguards. Obviously, international borders being closed doesn't help as well. Is there any other strategies that you see we can look at collectively to try and improve that capability and also bring more people into our industry?
Yeah, look, I think the solution, I mean, the workforce issue is not a new one, right? I think COVID just really amplified what the sector experiences in sort of July through August every year.
It seems every year we're running around when summer's just about to hit, and it's we need swim teachers and lifeguards.
It's absolutely always been the experience, and we always kind of pull it together and muddle through. But I think this year it's really going to be stress tested, and the organisations that are going to recover most quickly are going to be the organisations that are thinking most closely about their workforce and being innovative in their workforce recruitment retention strategies. I think the big key here is the employers and the organisations that employ these people. I think as a sector, we've relied too heavily in the past on RTOs to recruit and train potential employees to then employ. And I think that strategy is simply not going to work into the future. So yeah, we've got a lot of work as a sector to do in terms of bringing the employers together to really start talking about, stop paying lip service to this idea of career pathway, but actually look at investing in career pathway. And the investment's probably going to be made within the organisations themselves and with the support of, it may be the support of government, it may be support of other industry organisations, but it's going to have to start with the employers who have access locally to a workforce and making sure that they actually bring workforce into their venues and recruit and train and retain them. Because the new normal is going to be rolling lockdowns and job security is going to be highly valued from our employees.
Yeah. And I think the other part to that is, when you talk about attrition rates and retention and stuff's culture and leadership within the organisations as well to support people and succession planning and all that type of stuff. Would the ARI look at supporting the industry with that, in terms of a workforce strategy, standardising something like that?
It's certainly workforce is a big part of our broader strategy. Obviously, we're considering how we might be able to work with government to address the immediate need of workforce. But then then yeah, it's always been something that we thought about. Obviously, a couple of years ago, we had the mentor program, which was really about extending, the current workforce and helping to prepare them for management or leadership roles. We've re-engaged our Young Leaders Advisory Group, who are a bunch of passionate individuals who really want to help identify and promote a career pathway. And I think it's great that we're now well set up to listen to the voices of those that are actually going through and experiencing the sector and that career growth as we speak. I think as we get into more senior roles, we start to view that career journey in the light of what our career journey was, not necessarily in the light of what it currently is. So it's going to be really, really great to hear their stories and learn from them about where their pain points are, noting that the sector is really different today than it was 20 years ago when I came through some of those early roles. So yeah, we'll be listening to them and working with them, and certainly part of the role that we see that we play is influencing how other organisations will approach issues such as training or workforce development growth. I think workforce has to be top of mind for everyone right now. It's going to be the biggest challenge the sector faces. We've managed to muddle our way through in the past, but it's just going to be intensely stress tested this season and every season thereafter. The organisations that thrive are going to be the organisations that adapt and change.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt. I think COVID, we've always had the issues, but COVID's just emphasised, where we're at. And I think getting those fresh perspectives from younger people in terms of their journeys will be really insightful. And just nudging it along a little bit, 1 in 2 people within Australia have a chronic disease. If you could, nudge the system, one part of the system, to improve the health and well-being of Australians, what would that be for you?
Yeah, so I guess my passion and focus has always been around data, and I'm going to give you a data answer here because
I knew you were going to
disappoint
do
you. But I think one of the struggles that the sector faces is really understanding where they create value and making good investment choices. So it's not so much about nudging the system, but what I'd like to see happen is a better understanding of which levers to pull to nudge the system in the right direction. I don't know that I necessarily have the answer as to which direction the system should go, but I do think that if we're to make good decisions and to get good return on whether it's our organisation's investments, our own personal investments, or government investment, it's got to be done based on good evidence, not simply intuition. And I think at the moment, organisations make a lot of decisions based on intuition. Despite being data rich, they're not necessarily insight rich. And so what we need to do is actually get them looking at the data, challenging some of the assumptions, and then making more measured decisions in terms of what services they should be providing, how they provide those services to get the maximum benefit from those services.
Yeah, so from instinct to insight.
Absolutely. Do you mind if I hashtag that? Because I think I might be able to use that in the future.
Yeah, no worries. And obviously, a lot of people say data is the new oil, don't they? I think sometimes it's what do we measure though, and I find this with some of the programs that I deliver, Matt. We know we do some good stuff, and some of it's quantitative and qualitative. Some of the things you can't measure, right? It is that kind of instinct stuff.
Yeah.
But if we are looking at insight, and what are some of the stuff that we could be measuring better then to tell our story, and then maybe try and improve the health and well-being of Australians?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to unpack with regards to data and analytics in aquatics and recreation in particular, and what we need to really do is improve the data literacy and adoption across the sector. So we talk about what do we measure, how do we measure it, and what does it mean. The big, most important thing for our sector is actually moving beyond simply descriptive analytics, what has happened and what was the outcome, into diagnostic analytics, which is what does this data tell us about what we've done. And you're right, the key is asking the right questions. I think we're guilty of collecting a lot of data without really knowing what the application of that data is and what it's for. So understanding what is the right data to collect is really going back and starting with the question, what is it that I need to show from this program? So if the program is to improve swimming skills, then I need to actually go back and design the data that I collect around measuring the improvement of swimming skills. So that might be pre and post evaluation of a student skills against a scale. That's a fairly simple and obvious example, but then we get into the how do we measure, say, the social impact of physical activity and deferred health cost? And that's where we have to look at research that is happening in other sectors in terms of how they evaluate deferred health costs. Because what we might not have been doing it in aquatics and recreation at all before, there are certainly other sectors, other disciplines in research that have been doing that for quite some time. And what we need to do, and what companies like Active Exchange and KPMG and PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers are now doing, is bringing those models into aquatic recreation and trying to apply those. And what we need to understand as the sector is they're not absolutes. They're going to evolve and change. We need to understand what they tell us. And what they really tell us is trends over time. So how's that model changing and evolving and being reshaped based on the more data that gets put into that model? I think we get caught up with looking at one particular piece of information as a moment in time, as a answer to a question, but really what we're looking at is how is that data changing over time, and are we moving things in the right direction, or do we need to change direction right now? And I don't think there's an expectation that the data is going to give you an absolute, but it's not. It's going to give you a probability that this is most likely what's happening. And we need to actually then understand that if we're seeing a continual trend of that, great. If we're not seeing that trend, we need to change directions.
And I think we're on the path, aren't we? It's about asking the right questions, and technology and data. It's a one-way street. I don't think it's going to go back. It's just gonna we're gonna continue with it, and we're just going to get better at it. I think being able to tell that story. I don't think we're quite there just yet, but I think we're certainly getting there.
Yeah, we're certainly. Aquatics and recreation is usually a later adopter of technology and innovation, and I don't mean that in a bad way, right? When it comes to us, it's usually pretty proven, and we're usually pretty good at taking it up. I think the key for us as a sector is when we need to think about how we evaluate the success of something before we start something. So the evaluation has to be part of the program and project design up front, not we've got all this data, so what type of report we can put at the back of it. And that's at all levels of organizations and all levels of activity. So if it's a one-off program, it's more easy to design at the commencement, but we've got to design, our enrollment forms, for example, in Learn to Swim, to collect the information for the questions that we want to answer about our Learn to Swim program. And that's done by design, not by accident.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting that you're saying at the start of any core design of programs, start with what you're wanting to measure. So start with the end in mind, and then you'll it's not just something that you throw on at the end of it. Yeah, interesting. And that leads us to the last question, Matt. So where do you see yourself personally in the system, and how do you contribute and influence it?
Yeah, I think I sit at a couple of different levels within the system. Obviously, I am, my paid role is as a data analyst with BlueFit. And so my role there is really to, do what we've been talking about, which is try and influence the decision making with robust evidence. So I am not a decision maker necessarily myself, but what I do is try and answer the questions of our executive, so that they're well informed to make what they believe to be good decisions at the time, and nudge them in the right directions with regards to our programs and services. So certainly that's my role in that context. But when we talk about my role as chair of ARI, I think I've got a bigger role to play with regards to influencing the system as a whole across aquatics and recreation in New South Wales. And that's really by playing the role of facilitator. And I think a big key with our sector is that there's a lot of different bodies and organisations that work independently of each other. But if we're going to get meaningful change, we're going to need a whole of sector approach to a range of issues. And so the role of the ARI really now becomes wrangling those groups together and trying to get a whole of sector strategy in play in one part, and then the other part is obviously around how we tell the sector story and how we educate other key stakeholders that aren't engaged with us day to day, but are vital partners in the work we do, and most importantly, government. And I think we've still got a long way to go, and the ARI's role in the system is really to educate government about all the good work that the sector is doing and telling the story. We're more than just learn to swim. Learn to swim is vitally important, but we're also exercise, we're also, social interaction, we're also mental health, we're preventative health and wellbeing cog in a much bigger wheel, but we're vitally important to community. And we need the support of government, and we need that government recognition to allow the sector to actually take some big leaps forward.
Yeah.
So our role really there is as a facilitator.
Yeah. Well, I think 4 months, I think you guys can be really proud of all the work that you've achieved so far. And just one more question in terms of I suppose you talked about the system there, like if we think about the ARI and the ecosystem, there's obviously some other bodies as well in there, peak bodies. How do we all start working a little bit more collaboratively together?
Yeah, I think the best thing about a crisis is that it happened out of necessity. And I think what a lot of people don't realise is there was a lot of interaction between various bodies in the background, which led to what I think was quite an effective strategy with government to get the sector open. I think it's going to be a real challenge for the sector moving forward. There are a proliferation of peak bodies with, in my mind, quite narrow focus, right? And there are gaps within, sector representation. The challenge that we have is about adopting a sector first mentality when we try and work together, ensuring that what we're doing is in the best interest in the whole of sector. And I think that the key here is about engagement with those organisations. So the workforce in particular, so the people that work in aquatics and recreation, the organisations that are operating within this sector, really need to actually step up, become members of those organisations and make their voices heard and actually help influence the agenda. I think the organisations typically are members of multiple bodies and are the consistent, consistent group across multiple organisations. And they need to really express to those organisations what they need as a sector, rather than allowing the organisations to operate without clear guidance and direction. And I think what inevitably happens is all of the peak bodies are doing what they believe is best for the sector, but often working, have different interpretations or different applications of how they're going to achieve that outcome. But it's the employees and the workforce and the organisations that really have the ability to influence how they go about those things, and they need to actually express that more clearly. They need to become members of those organisations and express what their needs are, which will help foster some collaboration between the peak bodies and better alignment. It's really going to be a bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down, because it has been top-down for so long.
Right.
And it's now got to be more bottom-up, right? We've got to do better at listening to the sector and working on behalf of the sector.
I love it. Listening and collaboration and sector first, stronger together, isn't it? And I think, it's exciting times. So, Matt, thanks so much for giving me some time today. That was really, really cool to chat with you, and thanks for sharing your journey earlier on, where you opened up a little bit around some of the anxiety and stress that you've had. And I think that's showing that vulnerability shows what a great leader you are for the sector. So we're really lucky that you're at the ARI and with the rest of the board members. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think we've had a long, robust conversation, and I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity to talk to you today, David. And I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully your listeners and viewers take something from today, and really, I guess, take ownership of their role within the system as well, and what they can do to create change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope to see you in person soon as things open up, and just wish you all the best for the rest of the year, Matt, and take care.
Thanks very much, David.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
Thanks.